Alrighty then, this second tutorial is focusing on animation skills and really just trying to bring in the idea of the game of Pong and to get a handle around the basics of animation, moving things around the screen, all that kind of stuff, and locking in the time frame. So first up, we're going to start with this basic cube and we're going to modify it somewhat. We're going to shrink it in the thing to create in the Y direction to create a fairly thin panel, and then we're going to move it off into the distance about that. Now I will add a second cube and do the same basic thing to it. So it's roughly the same. If it's not precisely the same, it really doesn't matter. So I might reposition them both at around 5 pixels from the center. Actually no, I like it further apart, and we'll just move the camera to compensate. And then finally I'll add a little UV sphere and scale it down. I should also remember to activate the keyboard shortcut so you can see what I'm doing. S for scale, if those of you don't remember from last time. Okay, so here, this is the basic scene. What I'm going to do is use the selection tool and lock in all 3 of these animation items with an I for inserting its location into the keyframe sequence on the timeline. So now that they've all got a starting position, I can then jump along, say 10 frames, grab that UV sphere and reposition it. I'm going to just change my perspective a little bit so I can make sure that they line up, and then insert a keyframe again. Looking from this end, I always find it easy to look from the outside to do this stuff. I can reposition that so that they collide, and that looks pretty good. Then I'm purposely going to make a little bit of a mistake here, jumping along to frame 30, and you'll see what it is in a moment. I'm going to fire this back fairly straight, and maybe a little bit further into the distance, lock that in as a location. And then this one I'm going to reposition so that it intercepts. And if I just hit the playback head at this moment, Z, there. Select both, insert. So they've both got a position now. If I run the playback head back and just go from this frame 0 and start it off, what you'll notice is that the paddle on the left here is actually moving before it should. So that's a problem. And what we need to do is adjust this point so that it sits there for longer. So what we can do is we can just select and grab that and slide it out a bit, say frame 11, is that 11? Yeah. So that way it sits there until the ball starts flying back, and then it thinks about moving. And the same will need to happen here for this far one. So we'll need to lock that in before we start animating. And this will end up with these orange stripes further along the sequence as we go along. Now for this one I only want 100 frames to demonstrate the concept, so I'm just going to set that as it is. Jumping along to frame 50, again the ball's going to head on back, make sure it collides, and then grab in the shift Y direction so I can go up and around, but I still know it's going to hit because it's in that same vertical space from the Y-axis. I'm going to lock that in there because it's done, and this one I'm going to grab and intercept here, and here I can see a problem, so easily fixed. Moved a little too far, so I'll grab that in the Y direction until it bumps through to the other side. Easy. Then jumping on to frame 70, same basic deal. So I'm just going to grab that and drop it in that direction, and then probably look from this angle and drop it in the Z direction nice and low. And that should intercept, so I'll just lock it in position while I deal with this one. So switching the controls around a little so you can see all these different abilities or controls, and I'll lock in those two. Finally, I need to lock in this one. The ball shoots back for its final pass at frame 90, and I want to make sure it hits over here. Now I can guesstimate the distance because I know this to here is about 20. I'm going to make it run over 20 frames, so it's moving about one little square at a time. So if I jump to frame, say, 92, which is 22 frames away, and position the ball, I don't know, about 2 frames in, it should be sufficient to miss. So we'll just jump back 2 frames. Come on. No, it's... So we want this little paddle to arrive just a little bit late, so it misses its mark. Just doing it so they don't quite intercept. That should push to it. And then finally, what I need to do is I'll move this light back a bit so it's actually a little better illuminated, and then look at the positioning of the camera. This needs to be a lot further back, so we'll just pull it back here, rotate it so it's roughly pointing the right direction, have a look through the camera. They're completely off, so let's move it back a little, move it up a little, and then rotate to the side so we can draw it back. Again, the same technique I talked about earlier, trying to get that to form a little triangle with a flat surface there so you can draw it pretty much straight back. That should catch most of the scene. Running it over the playhead. That looks pretty good. Now, the next stage is actually to convert this into a finished movie or product. Now, I'm not going to worry about the coloration on these sort of things. It's actually really easy to do, but I'll save that for the next tutorial. What I do need to concern myself with is producing a piece of render footage. So the camera's set up, all the keyframes are set up, everything's ready to go. What I need to do now is look at the actual output context. So here in the first section I'm going to worry about is the dimensions of my render footage. I'm going to drop this way down low because that way it should render quickly. And I'll even drop the percentage down to about 50% or even lower, so it'll render out very quickly. Now for what you'll produce, you'll want those numbers a little higher, run it at 100%, but still run it at the TV PAL 4:3, because that way it will be produced. And then we need to look at what it's going to be producing as. So here in the output name, I'm going to give it a name. So this is me _ Pong. Normally you just put your name in there and that sort of stuff. Changing it to one of the video formats, in this case AVI JPEG. It renders in color, 90% quality, ready to go. And then we head up here to the render animation. You can hit Ctrl F12 and it will run through that whole sequence. If you look up in the top left hand corner of the screen, you can see it working things through fairly quickly at about 0.3 a second per frame. And that's pretty much it. So I'll give this a pause and we'll see once it's done. Alright, so it saves it to the temp directory, and if we actually use this little file viewer, we can see where it puts it, hopefully. It thinks about it, takes its time. Anyhow, I can't be bothered waiting. Oh, there it is. And it's saved as my Pong and a number sequence on the end with .avi. Hit and cancel on that, we can see where it's placed. Need that, don't need that. Alright, so here we can see that that's my little video. I hit double click on that one and it should open up, and there it plays as a little game of Pong. And that's done.